He showed me the holy city Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God. Today's epistle reading opens with an image of a massive city, described as the holy or purified Jerusalem, descending from the sky. The lectionary skips over the famous description of foundations built on gigantic jewels, gateways fashioned from giant pearls, and streets paved with gold in the midst of this more than 1,000-mile long, wide, and tall town. Instead, it takes us straight to the description of God and the Lamb's presence within the city, how they have become the source of light for all humanity. We then encounter an idyllic scene with mysterious trees set along a perfectly transparent river, people basking in God's presence, and endless joy and peace. As modern American Christians, the question immediately rises, is John describing an actual physical location? Is this what heaven is going to look like? And the answer to that is, I don't know, maybe? Churches in the United States have a rich, though relatively brief, tradition of reading this as a literal description. I would say that if John's images help you to faithfully follow Jesus along a path expressing God's generous and loving nature, it's perfectly fine to hang on to them that way. However, knowing that the apocalyptic genre John was using in his letter generally describes events of the author time, and that the language is highly symbolic or stylized, I suspect that this simplest and most popular of interpretations probably misses the point. If we do go in a somewhat literal direction, similarly to how Bishop Hunn challenged us to think about resurrection last week, my guess is that John is trying to push our minds beyond what we've ever considered, urging us to imagine something so far past our concept of reality that no words can describe it. The precious gems and metals and pearls are likely hyperbole, meant to stoke the ancient mind. The materials themselves wouldn't actually be the point. It's what applying those materials in such a mundane way reveals about the society using them. Luxury items that people still kill each other over today don't appear particularly valuable in the fullness of God's kingdom. It may be that they're so commonplace no one really cares about them anymore, but I find it more likely that their significance has fallen because people recognize and celebrate something far more valuable than what ultimately amounts to shiny rocks. It's the same with the river and the trees. What might these things mean to an ancient mind? A constant source of perfectly safe drinking water, an abundance of food available to anyone, and a variety of it at that? Trees that not only provide shade and fruit, but even leaves that are useful to humans. Those things might not mean much to us with tap water and freezers and grocery stores and over-the-counter medicine. But for people in the 1st and 2nd centuries, having a safe and reliable source of enough in any of those areas would have been a dream come true. Before exploring further in that direction, however, we should probably address a few of the darker moments that John presents in this passage. We read that nothing unclean will enter the city, nor anyone who practices abomination or falsehood, and that nothing accursed will be found there anymore. Now, I've always taken these statements as sort of threats or warnings, but I now doubt that John meant to cast any shadows on this scene of light and joy. He appears to be making simple observations. One who practices abomination is an ancient Jewish colloquialism for people who craft idols. Idols are physical stand-ins for concepts or entities that people use to focus their worship or prayer. Seeing that anyone in this city has direct and immediate access to the one true God at any time they please, that particular type of job would be useless. Lying would be equally pointless, what with being in the presence of the source of all truth and wisdom. The other terms are actually non-binary, meaning that unclean and accursed would be describing objects, not people. In most religious and cultural traditions, defilement spreads, corrupting things that we previously considered to be clean or holy. It's sort of a metaphysical play on our concept of infection control. By itself, a bag of flour is clean, perfectly fine and safe to use. However, if you were to open that bag one day and discover mouse droppings in it, everything in and including the bag is ruined and needs to be thrown away. Or consider medical professionals scrubbing in for surgery. They're careful to wash their hands and don their protective gear in a certain fashion and order. If they make the slightest mistake, they dump everything in the trash and start over, just in case some sort of germ accidentally transferred onto what was supposed to be a sterile surface. Under this mode of thinking, if something unclean or cursed were to enter the city, its defilement couldn't help but spread, possibly corrupting everything and everyone inside. However, there is a sub-theme sprinkled throughout the Hebrew Bible about a point when all of that reverses. At that time, cleanness becomes dominant and begins pushing out defilement. Wastelands become lush fields. Fresh water somehow completely desalinates the Dead Sea. Even plates and utensils purify whatever touches them. All of this flows out from God's presence, overturning our human expectations and eventually sanctifying the entire world. We see hints of this beginning in the Gospels, where Jesus touches someone with leprosy or another disease and says, "Be clean," or where he forgives sin. By the end of Revelation, this new standard appears to be in full force. That being the case, the idea of preventing something from entering the city because of defilement becomes a moot point. Nothing unclean will enter it because everything automatically purifies itself before it even reaches the gates.